And before we get started, a huge thanks to our session sponsor today, Rheem. Check out the Rheem Prestige, an award-winning product that basically takes the energy out of the air and then uses it to heat hot water at 300 plus efficiency. It's a heat pump water heater, works in hot climates, cold climates, new homes, existing homes, multifamily as well, retrofits right in. Make sure to check out the new product from Rheem. And then our top tier sponsor, Mitsubishi. Mitsubishi is an award winner this year from the Green Builder Sustainability Awards 2019 for their one-way sealing cassette. Mitsubishi provides all your heating, cooling, and filtration needs all in one system. Today's low-load homes require right-sized equipment that most systems, especially gas-fired, can no longer meet. Mitsubishi has low-load, high-efficient heat pumps that dehumidify and cool in the summer and work in reverse in the winter. Going ductless reduces costs and makes it easier to meet ENERGY STAR version 3 as well as LEED for Home certification. Ductless mini splits can now be hidden in many different ways to meet all your clients' needs, and ducted systems can now be used as well. Ducted systems are hidden behind the walls to ensure a beautiful space and can be retrofitted in place of a furnace on existing single-family or multifamily projects. Hyperheat ensures efficient heat delivery down to negative 13 degrees, and backup strip heaters can kick in during the rare but coldest of cold days. Each room of a house can have customized comfort while still being all electric and energy efficient for clients with different needs, and only heat or cool rooms that need it. Multifamily and commercial centralized variable refrigerant flow or VRF systems work great on larger projects looking to serve whole buildings. VRF heat recovery technology permits for simultaneous cooling and heating. As this illustration depicts, a space can have many purposely designed areas, each area requiring a different cooling or heating need. Check out Mitsubishi Comfort today for all your HVAC needs. All right, well, welcome to an introduction to getting multifamily buildings to all electric and zero carbon. This course is approved for 1 hour in continuing education units, GBCI, AIBD, NARI, Green, Certified Green Professional, BPI, NonWholeHouse, as well as American Institute of Architects, Health, Welfare, and Safety, AIA HSW, which may make it applicable to your state-based design or contractor license. Today, I will be your moderator. My name is Brett Little, and I am the executive director here at the nonprofit, the GreenHome Institute. So we're going to be talking about today is how do we get our multifamily building sector, new and existing, to all electric and zero carbon? What are the challenges? What are the opportunities? And I'm very excited to have Sean Armstrong. He is the managing principal of Redwood Energy, an industry-leading consultancy devoted to all electric, plus electric residential design. His firm has designed more 100% solar-powered housing than any other in North America, focusing on multifamily housing for low-income households in California, Florida, Washington, D.C., and New Mexico. And so with that, Sean, I'm going to turn it over to you, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Brett. Sound check, everything sounding good?
Oh yeah, sounds really good, thank you.
Awesome. Okay, if you turn over the screen, I'm ready for you.
There you go.
Hey, good morning, everybody. You're standing on the roof of the United States' first zero net energy apartment complex. It's built in 2012 in Arcata, California, at the insistence of the City Council. Previous year, there had been a zero net energy condo development up in Washington. So this is 29 apartments, and it was done at a break even. I'm going to dig into all the details of how to do like a 100% solar powered development in this presentation. Just to introduce myself, I started off and am still involved with a very humble demonstration home on Humboldt State University's campus. It's a campus center for appropriate technology, dates from 1978. When I lived there in 1999 as a co-director, we had pedal power, we had a wind turbine, biodiesel, solar arrays. The technologies have shifted over the years to be a little bit more practical, not much pedal power left. And but I still sort of hold the spirit. I wanted to become a science teacher, I did, but I only spent a few years in the industry. I struggled to get a job locally. So locally, I got a job with the largest general contractor to be their project manager for affordable housing and green building and environmental site remediation. So I worked with them for 6 years, Professionally, as a construction cost estimator, I'm going to bring that forward later. It was my job to usually reduce construction costs for these 4 or 5 apartment complexes a year. I had to reduce it by 30% often. So I had to go through every line item and try to understand why things cost what they cost and how to reduce it. How I came to understand that all electric construction was significantly less expensive to build. So in 2011, I started a consultancy with my partner, Michael Winkler. And we've got a bunch of staff now. We work on maybe 250 apartment complexes to date. And what we do is just over and over work with developers of all different stripes to get rid of the gas. And if they would like, ideally put solar on the roof. And that's mostly what we do. So to start off, I try to focus on the fact that this is a cleaner and quieter, but most importantly, less expensive lifestyle. What you're seeing here is an all-electric version of a gas life that you might be familiar with, which is we've got a nice kitchen. This is at the Hilton Grand Islander in Hawaii. Lots of all-electric kitchens in Hawaii. You see something that the electric backpack blower, that's 1/4 as loud as the gas version. They come with replaceable batteries, so you can run them just for hours and hours. You see the Dimplex Optimist. That's basically, there's I think 3 different fireplace companies now that make mist, light it with LEDs, and then give you an electric heating element underneath it to blast you with heat. This is the way that you can transition with no pain, just pleasure, just a better lifestyle on the other side of it at a lower cost. This happened previously, most dramatically, in 13 years in New York City. There's 400,000 horses in New York City. They had 1,500 dead and left on the street a year. There's full-time staff going out and picking up dead horses. The animal abuse is so rampant that it actually founded the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals to stop people beating horses to death. You can't beat a dead horse. You can beat a horse to death and then have someone nearby say, "Stop beating that dead horse." You know, it's horrifying us. That's what it used to be like in New York City. Horses only lived for 3 years. They required huge amounts of land. I mean, you have to take at least 2 acres of land per horse to feed it per year. So just getting hay into the city and then cleaning up the other side of hay, the poop, it filled the streets with poop. No one was responsible for cleaning up poop. So when the car came along, people were delighted because the horse had become unprofitable. People say it's too costly to buy and too costly to keep. It's too expensive. Not only was it filthy, not only was it land intensive, not only was it socially degrading and dangerous to have all these rotten corpses around causing diseases. And you can see the equivalency in fossil fuels, that it's expensive, that it's causing people to be ill, that it's ruining the land and the air and the water. So what happened then was that horses were banned in small steps, and there's a better alternative. So they banned horses in front of City Hall. They're just so noisy. They banned them on certain expensive rich people's streets because those people had the political power to say, enough of this. We'd like to not have poop everywhere. We don't need horses. They got restricted. They had to be sleeping inside of buildings at night. So you can no longer leave them out in the winter. Just the way that they regulated it made it really easy and obvious that people need to transition wholesale over to something else, either an electric car or a gas car. And there's a whole story around why, gas cars have more storage. Electric cars were the first cars. They were neck and neck for a while. Gas cars obviously took a lead, and now we're coming back to electric cars with better batteries. So first, it's a fact. Kitchen air is filthy. It is equivalent to smog. It is harming children. I'm going to go into the details of this, but these are 4 recent studies that have come out to authoritatively say, like if you have gas in your home, people who previously had asthma, they're going to have worse asthma. They're going to have more wheeze. They're going to have more coughs. They're going to have more hospitalizations. They're going to be on 3 times as much medication. They're going to have more heart pain. Like all of it. It's terrible for both children and old people and anyone who has impaired lung function. Cooking on gas is a terrible thing for your health. Because 3 different dangerous chemicals all are regularly exceeded in their federal levels of health and safety inside of people's kitchens. There's carbon monoxide, of course, nitrogen dioxide, which is a chemical that you get regulated around gas power plants, and then formaldehyde at the bottom. Formaldehyde is sort of horrifying because kitchens end up being the #1 source of formaldehyde in people's homes. What formaldehyde does is it rips apart your DNA. It's that chemical that you soak dead things in so they last hundreds of years. I mean, nothing survives formaldehyde. And it hurts people, any cell that it touches. It's a scentless, invisible gas that's heavier than air, and it pools around your feet while you're cooking. At your feet are usually children and pets. And so you can see pet leukemia and child leukemia is this very fast acting cancer that is horrifying to parents because usually your kid is sick and then they're dead 3 weeks later or a week later or a month later. It's just so fast that you can't stay on top of the fact that your kid has an aggressive cancer that's caused by formaldehyde exposure, among other chemicals, but that is one of the things that definitely causes leukemia. And of course, it raises your likelihood of a variety of illnesses, such as asthma. Formaldehyde it hurts people's lungs. So these graphs here are from Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratories. They've studied this over and over and over and over since 2011 in different housing types and 77 houses, tons of metering. They're clearly saying that gas stoves hurt people most of the year, most of the time. But that graph, for me, was hard to understand. So I went and I interviewed Brett Singer, Dr. Brett Singer at Lawrence Berkeley National Labs. He's the lead author on most of these papers. A New Yorker article in April this year about the hidden air pollution in our homes said kitchen air during cooking was so dirty that there's actual smog formation after 20 to 30 minutes of cooking on a gas stove. Was that an exaggeration? And he replies to my email, if you add pollutants like nitrogen dioxide from gas stoves to the cooking emissions from the pans, it is a mixture of pollutants deserving of a name like smog, although that name is already taken by outdoor air pollution. And I don't think outdoor air pollution is going to be like arguing that it can't share the name of smog. Look on the right-hand side. On the right part of this graph, the 2017 outdoor air, 30 to 60 ppb, that's the dirtiest air that we have in the United States. They test these same 23 sites year after year since the 70s. So in places that are forming smog, you see outdoor air like this. On the left-hand side is what indoor air is in your kitchen. After one dish on an electric stove, one gas stove dish, just one dish, versus a full meal, like for dinner for 2 people. The gas pollution is off the charts, literally. I stopped this graph at 500 ppb, but there's lots of data that takes you up to 700, 800, and 1,000 ppb. This is the California Air Resources Board testing people's kitchens, testing all sorts of different meals being prepared. Huge analysis, finding essentially that it's dirtier inside your kitchen after a meal than it is outside. Mostly because for 30 years we've been regulating nitrogen dioxide further and further down out of our outside air, which is why we have cleaner air than we had historically today, even though it's still dirty. So getting electric range, getting electric stove reduces most of the air pollution. The air pollution then just becomes the oils cooking as opposed to a very dirty flame. It's not a regulated, cleaned, scrubbed flame. It's a dirty flame, and it's a dangerous amount of chemicals that come off of it. So this is part of why all electric is fast becoming a standard in the Bay Area and elsewhere in the country. I'm going to show you lots of places that do all electric. In the Bay Area, there's a number of rules around the safety and health of people. Like you have to do more testing of gas stoves, and you discover about half of gas stoves are broken when you install them. We do that testing. It's either carbon monoxide or there's a gas leak or both. About half the stoves are brand new going in. Then they have the issue of if a gas stove gets a fire in an apartment complex, of course, it hurts far more people than if it's in your own home. So all over the country, people have been moving away from gas stoves because they're dangerous. That danger is why Berkeley's just banned gas from all new construction. Specifically, it's because of public safety. Gas infrastructure doubles the risk of a gas fire after an earthquake. This is a historical fact. The state has documented all the earthquakes since 1906, what was the cause of fire. Half of the fires every single time are gas pipes breaking and exploding. It's not a gas explosion as well is not just like a normal fire. It will frequently destroy the building all at once and harm many people nearby. You can't anticipate it. It's an explosion. In this case, after the explosion of this building, the community had to rally because two of the three water supply systems had been broken during the earthquake. So this is what it looks like when the tertiary system gets used in San Francisco, just across the bay from Berkeley, where they banned gas last week in all new construction. People have to be the ones who show up first and get the hoses out. It takes hours, perhaps, after a major earthquake for you to get public safety people there. There might be 100 to 150 fires going on at the same time. Your fire might not be the most important fire, or you might be cut off. In this reality, historical reality, Berkeley and other cities in the Bay Area are moving towards banning gas in new construction. Berkeley just did it. Oakland is seriously considering it. Alameda. San Francisco has already announced a ban in all municipal construction going forward. 2 years ago, the public utilities, sorry, the state's universities, the University of California system announced no new gas buildings in any of the university buildings anywhere throughout the state. This is when you have a lot of people in one place, it is dangerous to have explosive materials around. So this is a cute little dense apartment complex that has no gas in it in San Francisco. It is also resilient in the face of power outages. After an earthquake, usually there's 3 weeks to 2 months before gas gets turned on. Electricity is usually back on within 1 to 3 days. So this is already an all-electric development is inherently resilient, where they'll get their power back of all types after the earthquakes, which come on the daily in California, little tiny ones. Here you can see the Tesla Powerwall batteries. This car here, the Tesla, in this actual apartment complex, which has a cool little canopy up there, it's 4 apartments, everything is offset, both the consumption of the car and the consumption of the household, and they all have enough battery power to last for 3 days. When this fall they install a car to building inverter, those cars will essentially triple the amount of power available to the building. And that will allow a building, and with a solar array up there, actually, it'll be able to make power and then store it day in and day out, about 3/4 of the year. And with a car, you could see how you could drive it over to some place that had power in an emergency. There'll be emergency power some places. Power up your car and bring it home, the way that people right now bring home gasoline but run out of gasoline. Or, just use the solar panels on your roof and not run out of quote unquote gasoline ever. Just keep on powering and saving it there, and you don't have to leave and go get in a gas line like you see after hurricanes. Now, I'm just giving you the public safety parts of this, which are very animating for the general population. For developers, it's this slide. This is how much it costs to develop in California if you're putting in gas. So I apologize, there's a typo up here, but it's $141 over to $371. That extra 7 shouldn't be there. For low pressure distribution, just the developer has to actually put gas into the street. 90% of homes in California are built by developers. So every linear foot, they're going to have about $200 of gas that goes in, they have to pay for, and the house pays for it. Then the house down below, you can see, pays for $16,567, which is the standard quote from PG&E, to put in a lateral, and that's not a typo. That's almost $17,000 to get a lateral in. Then the infrastructure of the piping in the house is once again very expensive as an added feature of a gas-using home. It's $200 up to $1,000 per fixture just to get the gas to the fixture, depending upon how big the house is. So little apartments, it might be $200 to $400 per fixture, and a larger home, 200 to 2,000 to 3,000 square feet, you're definitely looking at more like $1,000 a fixture just to get gas to an appliance that is also more expensive than the electric equivalent. I'm going to go through that in a lot of the rest of the slide deck here. But this infrastructure cost is the big cost. It is most of the additional $25,000 it takes to put gas into a house in California, a state that already has about 40% of its population living, in close to or at the poverty line. It's a very low income state. There's huge amounts of wealth, but as a state, it's the most number of low income people you're going to find in any state in the country. It's a very large population of people who can't afford an extra $25,000 on the sale price of their home. On the right-hand side, you can see why gas prices are going up 45% over the next 3 years in California. Safety, because we've had so many explosions, is requiring the gas companies go out and fix the leaks, which I had 4 on my street and 1 in my yard, which was explosive when they found it. So now that they're having to go fix leaks, we're getting to see them dramatically increase the pricing because they're going out and having to rip it up streets and replace stuff and do it right. So distribution systems are very expensive as you go up this chain. It all gets rate-based. It's hard to say how much of any one thing, but it's easy to say that 80% of your bill is actually the gas infrastructure price, not the gas delivery. Of course, they try to structure it to make it look like it's delivery. It's actually the infrastructure price being rate-based. They pass it on. Gas utilities are in the business of developing infrastructure. 80% of the revenue is from developing infrastructure. So the death spiral that the gas companies all fear is when people stop asking for new gas infrastructure. It's actually not the issue that people maybe use less of what they have in their homes. Efficiency is not what makes gas turn off. Stopping the expansion of gas is what triggers a crisis for the business model of gas companies because they're in a shell game model, just a shell game. They get all their money from putting in infrastructure and then they divert some of it over to maintenance and they try to make it look like they're selling you gas when in fact they're selling you 40 years of infrastructure a little piece at a time. So developers across the country are savvy to this. We have had a nonstop growth of all electric construction in the United States since 1993. It's been led by the South. It has been pretty stagnant in the Northeast and the Midwest. It's been growing somewhat in the West. The South has led it. Now it's 60% of new construction in the South is all electric. And 4 in 10 homes in the country are built in the South. So it's actually like the biggest of all the growth of homes area in the country, and it's being grown by savvy developers who are eliminating gas development pricing out of their projects. In yellow here, you can see the states that have had growth of all electric construction since 2010. This map was developed by the Propane Education Research Council for their constituents to try to understand why they were losing market share. And they're like, oh, now that electric space heating is so efficient and it works in super cold climates, we're losing market share. People are stopping putting in propane or natural gas to their homes. It's not political. It's just the cheapest way to develop. I want to just say that again. This is not political. It's just the cheapest way to develop. And you can move forward in any conversation with anyone with that piece of information in your head. Any client. And the person that hired me and kept me going for 6 years, Danco Communities, every one of my coworkers and executives listened to Rush Limbaugh in the morning. I got to hear it as I walked down the hallway. The conversations at the lunch, this was not people who were interested in my thoughts about greenhouse gas reductions from eliminating gas into buildings. They were delighted to hear that I could cut their costs significantly by getting rid of gas infrastructure with an efficient electric design. And that's how I stayed employed, as they fired almost everyone in the office. They had 50 people when I got employed. There were 9 people when I got fired during the recession or let go, And they kept me around because of this. So I just want to pass that forward. This is the strongest message I can communicate to you. It's evidenced. This is in the South, Pensacola, Florida. This is what apartment complexes and condos look like. Everything, 100% of all the buildings there are all electric for the apartment complexes. 60% of their restaurants, fast food restaurants like Wendy's and McDonald's, an electric fryer gets you If it's 4 minutes to actually cook French fries, it takes 5 minutes for a gas fryer to get that job done, but only 4 minutes for an electric fryer. They have a faster recharge. They can get hotter faster. As a consequence, you can sell more French fries during rush hour. It's as simple as that. That's huge. Rush hour only lasts for an hour. So you can get 20% more French fries sold in an hour. Here is a poignant example. These are tiny homes that were just finished in Santa Rosa, which is one of the most expensive housing markets because it's part of the Bay Area. These were $150,000 to develop, and they saved a total of $30,000 from the development not putting in gas. That was great. You know, that was 1/3 of one of these 14 tiny homes, which are for homeless veterans. Those 14 people that got the homes are of 400 in Santa Rosa that are homeless and have a voucher from the federal government for housing, if they could just find someone who could rent it to them at the price of the voucher. So legitimate veterans with a voucher, still homeless. Solving that problem, this is about homeless farmers. We got a grand prize from the United Nations. We got a nice award from the Department of Energy. The first time housing, permanent housing that had been built in Yolo County where all your almonds are grown. It was financed by putting in the solar array. All electric reduced the construction cost. Putting in the solar array, because solar energy is cheaper than the grid electricity, netted the project $400,000 at the end. And this is a 62-unit apartment complex, and it was $200,000 an apartment to develop. So that was 2 more apartments that we got out of this development because it had solar arrays on it. That's the cost savings are what financed 2 households more farm worker housing. This is a for-profit developer of affordable housing, and now their standard is to get rid of all the gas and put in a solar array so they can get cheaper electricity. And it's just a business move that they make as a standard now. Just wanted you to see it. This is what it looks like from the sky. You know, hot tubs, swimming pools, the whole bit, all electric. An example of one of these homes, different developer. These are family homes, you know, in Selma. This is where your raisins come from. On the left at the bottom, that's a reversible air conditioner, which is called a heat pump. It is an air conditioner. It's the exact same technology, just they have a reversible pump and 1 additional valve. Now it's a heater in the wintertime. In the middle is the fan coil. It's just 1 fan coil instead of 2. So that's where you see construction cost savings there for a heat pump versus a furnace and air conditioner. You see the heat pump water heater stuck out in the garage, works great. It's a very well insulated building to make it so it's cost effective. And buildings like that are now the code in California. So on the left-hand side, you see a scale where when I started in the industry in 2005, this was the code I was working with in California, and much of the country has gone through this 2006 International Energy Conservation Code baseline. You might be familiar with what are the measures there. In 2016, right now until next year, we have this 2016 code here in California that says we have to get to a 65 if you're using, you know, 2006 as the baseline, and 0 to 100. Next year, we have to get to a 41 to 48 on that scale, which is by far the world's most energy efficient building code. It's going to be difficult. Everyone acknowledges it. And going all electric is a dramatic way to get more energy conservation. So this is a way of forcing the state to go all electric functionally. And then you have to put solar on, and you have to do it for all the electricity that's expected out of a gas electric hybrid home. They couldn't ban gas, but they did get all the electric load solar offset as the code. So that's what we start doing in 2020. Solar offset, 0 net electric, but not 0 net energy. Even if it's all electric, you still only have to do about 60, 70% with solar. And like I said, this is how we're gonna push the state all electric. You can see the efficiency of gas on the left and electric on the right. I have the 420% heat pump at my house. It cost me $3,500 to install for a heater for my whole house. It's 1,100 square feet, built 100 years ago, partially insulated. And I have a solar array for half of my bill, but it keeps me out of the dangerous high usage areas, and it keeps my electricity free during the day when prices are high. So that's what I do. I got a cheap, super efficient heat pump over in Japan. where they value efficiency far more, and they have a different refrigerant called R32. They have even more efficient heat pumps. It's all the same manufacturers. Design is done mostly in Japan. Manufacturing is done mostly in China, with some work done in Italy as well. And then United States is most of our manufacturers are owned by Japanese companies or Italian companies, just so you know. And we get, as a consequence, better technology than has been developed in the United States, where we've been focusing on gas ever since the oil embargo of 1973. We've been just terrified of running out of gas ever since, and underinvested in renewable energy and electricity using devices that could then be hooked up to renewable energy. So anyway, a little geopolitical conversation there, but this is how we get ourselves out of a hole in this world, is that we go to high efficiency, which is not available with gas. Here you can see the utility bills on average in our country. On the right is the gas bills. That the bottom of the scale is at $225 for the least expensive to operate gas water heater, period. On the left-hand side, you can see that the heat pump water heaters are literally off the scale at $161 a year, and that's because of the efficiency. That's how it works. It's cheaper to operate all electric on average in our country. I say on average because every state is different. About a quarter of the states in the United States, according to my analysis, it would be more expensive to operate with all electric. It's not very many people who live in those states, but it's my home state of Wisconsin where it's particularly challenging. So that's real, but in the vast majority of the country, it is cheaper. So high performance electric water heaters cost the same amount. They're far more efficient, but they cost the same amount. Top left, you see heat pump water heaters, $1,289, $1,379. And then the water heaters that produce that same amount of water on the gas side, either the tank or the on-demands, those are all about the same price, right in the range, the $1,200, $1,300, as cheap as $1,000 bucks. But you have to look at the question of how much water it's producing, because you can undersize water production with on-demands, like where just a couple of fixtures start creating cold water. So replacement products for heating and cooling. Here, this is the cheapest way that you could do heating and cooling for a house. On the left-hand side, this is a product type that's only coming to the market. Sakura and Nova, they offer these things, but they're not yet here. But these are a system that you hang on the wall, and then you put ducts through the wall. I've gotten a couple experimental models. They're fine. On the right-hand side, you have ones that cut a hole through the entire wall, and that is more construction. It's more expensive. But in these products here, like Mitsubishi and Arama, and the Cool product is by Friedrich. These are quiet versions. The ones that go through the wall are frequently noisy because they're cheap. So if you spend, instead of $700, $1,200, you can get one that's silent. So I think that's totally worth the investment. In my house, I have something just like this. I have a wall-mounted fan coil because that costs me the least amount of money to install in my house. Here I have a $6,000 plus $3,500 per zone. That is pricing that's accurate to California on average. The lowest price you would see is $4,500. I got it for $3,500 as a sweetheart deal with my friend, who's like my friend general contractor, so he came over and helped. So it depends on who's doing this work, but $6,000 is a very reasonable, generous plug to stick in your budget. The reason why it costs more, even though you might be doing the same amount of heating and cooling as the previous, it might be a 12,000 BTU per hour heat pump. It might be the same heating and cooling capacity, but there's this expense of putting in a refrigerant line between the outside compressor and the inside fan coil. And that refrigerant line and the electricity you have to run between the two, and the cement pad that you have to develop outside underneath the compressor, these things are all adding about a day of labor. You're going to spend thousands of dollars essentially with a couple of professionals working at $50 to $150 an hour of burden labor as professionals doing this work. It's expensive to put in the refrigerant line. So it's cheaper to have it done in the factory. It's just as simple as that. You might be more familiar with systems like this, blown systems. They cost more. They have a larger compressor. They take more infrastructure to support. Just because the nature of markup, if things are more expensive to start off with, they end up significantly more expensive to end with. So, and then ducting costs maybe $4,000 to $20,000 to put in ductwork underneath or in the attic, if you do new ductwork. So $9,000 could be as cheap as $6,000, but I'm trying to just give people more realistic numbers for a variety of markets. There. If you're working in fancy situations where they got radiant floors, you're going to spend about the same amount of money to get the same size compressor, about 9 grand installed. Could be a little less, of course. But then the radiant floor, that's like $15,000 to $30,000 to have the plumber doing a radiant floor system that's tied up to this not so expensive radiant system. That's a lot of money for comfort. And I just want people to see those numbers and get a realistic understanding of what does it cost to get this style versus something that is totally comfortable, can produce the same amount of heating and cooling silently in every room if you wanted to have like a fancier situation, or like this one where you can hide them sometimes up in the ceiling at a lower price but still get continuous heating and cooling. These are kind of noisy and they're more expensive, and they do, I think, make the air dirtier because of ductwork. Cleaner, more expensive. So California's utilities have been focusing on installing water heaters cheaper with a set of standards that are called Retrofit-Ready. So it has to plug into the wall with 120-volt electricity. No rewiring to 240-volt, just wall electricity. It has to use no more power than a hairdryer on medium, no more than 1200 watts. So you can install it into any plug in the house with no new wiring. 120 volts is just like a low-grade appliance, and it has to be at least 300% efficient and talk with the grid operator so they can turn it on and off. The utilities insisted on that. So here you have it. Like on the left-hand side, this is already available in Europe. Italy has been leading the charge on making these products, and Ariston, an Italian company, owns HTP, an American company. And so HTP is going to be able to offer these products, like on the left, a wall-hung 30 or 40-gallon heat pump water heater with a compressor on top that fits into a closet, kind of like an on-demand does. And all these heat pump water heaters, they have the small compressors on top on the left-hand side versus the ones that have a compressor that lives outside. The ones on the left-hand side, that compressor on top, it's just fine to put it inside of someone's home. There's been 4 different big studies done on this showing that water heaters don't use that much heat, that the heat that they're getting, about half of it is from the house being warmed by the sunshine, so it's kind of free heat. They work very efficiently and quietly indoors, and they do not make it unpleasant. They're just like, keep it simple, just retrofit wherever the water heater is, it'll be fine. 4 different studies that say that. So retrofit-ready cooking replacements. This is my kitchen. Should you be, like engaged on the topic of how much air pollution is being caused in our kitchens and how that's affecting the people that we love, or the pets, if you consider them people, which I do. This is how I fixed it in my kitchen. I didn't get a fancy new stove. I got a Eurodib 2-burner, and I got 2 of them. So they're each about $200. So now I have 2 cooking stations in my kitchen, so my wife can cook at the same time I can, which I love, because I used to have a lot of fights around sharing the stove. It's a small kitchen. So now I got 2 cooking stations, and it's induction. It's super fast. Everyone loves it more. My wife makes yogurt. She likes that it can cook at 140 Fahrenheit, exactly at that temperature for scalding milk. I like how fast I can get my stir fries going. And then I have this cool little oven down below. It also just plugs into the wall. These are both 120 volts. They're both under 1400 watts. They can plug into any outlet in a kitchen, like a blender. Totally fine. And I'm a I like to call myself a gourmet cook. I've cooked for a lot of restaurants and such, I know how to cook, and I love this. This is superior. If you want to get the more conventional oven plus ranges, you can see on the top, these are fancier electric radiant. So it's like rental is generally, but also as replacement. If you like it, it's fine. Down below is the more expensive version with induction. That is a superior cooking, but electric radiant's come a long way. It's pretty good these days. And I've seen also that making systems more complicated with more computers and more controls inevitably leads to failure, period. So keep it simple kind of situation would be using the ones up above potentially, although all of them have computers, gas stoves, everyone has computers now. All electric fine dining. Here are chefs in New York City. These are all electric restaurants. They did it on purpose. This is for superior cooking. They got written up in various magazines, so made a little slide out of them. I focused on the fact that it's in multifamily buildings to help people understand that you can do an all-electric apartment complex with all electric downstairs and not worry about losing restaurants or something as potential tenants. Quite the contrary. You make it all electric, it's a superior experience for chefs. As an example, gas stoves burn at 3,400 degrees Fahrenheit. An induction stove tops out at 450 degrees Fahrenheit. So historically, people have had to have a rite of passage. When I was 19, I was trying to gain acceptance at Restaurant Levan. This is now the head chef there. It was a hot spoon held over a flame. Another cook did it and pressed it there. That's how you get inducted into the experience of cooking in gas kitchens. Things are so hot because gas stoves burn at 25% efficiency as opposed to 90%, which is induction. They're 3 times as hot in there, and then the gas flame itself is 3,000 plus degrees versus 450 in an induction kitchen. And so you touch anything and it gives you a permanent 3rd-degree burn immediately. And you have to learn how to deal with the suffering that comes from that all over your arms. So people love going to induction. Now here is another innovation you might not be familiar with, which is get rid of the gas boiler, stick in a heat pump water heater system downstairs in the basement. You can attach them to the walls in parking garages or in boiler rooms. You can stick them up on the roof. The sand in here is a cold climate product, so if you keep snow off of it, it operates all winter long in any climate in the United States. And on the left-hand side, you can see this development. They put up a PV array up on the 9th floor roof. So they make electricity up there and they deliver it, through the system downstairs to where the heat pump water heaters are in the basement where it's kind of warm anyway. They can just use that heat for the water heaters. And so this lowered the bills. It dropped the energy consumption of the building by 80%. It was a win-win in all ways. It was a low-cost solution that had permanent savings built into it. And this is happening all over California, where various programs are gutting buildings of their gas and putting in heat pumps as opposed to gas boilers, reducing the bills, reducing the energy consumption, getting rid of fossil fuels in the building, getting rid of danger. It can also just be more luxurious. So I swim here. This is my friend CJ Ralph. He's an internationally renowned birder. He runs lots of labs. He lives in a nature reserve with this swimming pool, and it's a glassed-in swimming pool where he grows pineapples and sugarcane and bananas. And for years, he had it on a solar thermal system. The solar thermal system that you can see there was about $30,000 to install, and it didn't work in the wintertime. He had to use propane. Now, on the right-hand side, you can see the heat pump water heaters, and it cost $5,000 for him to install I think it was the Heat Pro, the lower left. $5,000, and it works in the wintertime at 400% efficiency. So 1 unit of electricity in from his PV array, 4 units of heat collected from the air and stuck in his swimming pool. And I love going there because you can have a 90-degree swimming pool on a cold day outside and be using renewable energy as super efficiency to have it done. And it's cool to see pineapples in the winter without actually going to Hawaii. You can have superior experiences with fireplaces. You know, on the right-hand side, you can see you can do colors if you want. These are LEDs after all, who are illuminating mist very convincingly. You can stick your hand into the flames, like on the middle left. This is a countertop or like it's a tabletop decorative flame, the Dimplex Optimus Pro 400. It's not cheap, but the point is that it's a party favor. You can stick your hand in fire, and it looks like fire, but it's not. That's just fun. Or in the middle there, the classic flame Felicity, 350 bucks. That's so you don't get that carbon monoxide headache whenever you're standing outside at parties and conferences and whatever, weddings and such. You're standing underneath the heaters and you start getting a headache from the heavy duty carbon monoxide poisoning you're experiencing. These are the ones that just plug into the wall, and they're electric resistance heaters for outside. Nothing fancy, but that's what they do, you know. A number of these are for like skiing lodges and restaurants and such. All sorts of options out there, so you can have convincing flame, electric heating, and have it look awesome. Yeah. So, and it's not polluting. It's safer to install. It's cheaper to install. You don't have to vent it. You don't have to plumb it. You have to get water there. That's true. You have to plumb it with water or fill up water canisters depending upon the product. And that's it. That is the end of my presentation. And I want to take questions. I was hoping there'd be questions going along. I'm here for another 45 minutes. We can hang out, go through individual projects that people might have. I can discuss whatever you want.
Hey, great. Thanks, Sean. Yeah, we've got some questions coming in. And right before we get to those questions, real quick, for those of you who are wondering, to get your CEUs, just make sure to take that survey that pops up at the end. Same one will be emailed to you. Just take it once. And even if you don't need CEUs, please take it anyway. We definitely want your feedback. For those of you listening to this in the future on demand, make sure to take that quiz with an 80% passing rate, and then follow the instructions either on our YouTube channel or USGBC to get your CEUs. Where are we at here? So on YouTube, go ahead and go down to click the YouTube channel there, link the big name, and then up will pop up on the left there, some commentary at the bottom, click show more, and then on the right there, you're going to see more details about how to access that quiz, and then take that quiz, and then we'll tell you how to submit. And more questions are coming in. Before we get to those questions, a huge thanks to our board of directors, our volunteers, all of our members. A big thanks to our top tier sponsors, T-Stud, structurally insulated framing systems for saving energy and money behind the walls, Shrinergy for on the go and in your house or business backup solar powered batteries for not if but when the grid fails, Panasonic ventilation for all your ventilation needs to legally comply with code all the way up to helping your clients breathe and live better, and then Mitsubishi Electric helping you get to net zero energy, going all electric, energy efficiently and affordably. So yeah, we've got some time for questions and some questions coming in. And John, you kind of did hint to this a little bit, but just kind of going back to that, some of those states where you had mentioned, costs were really high to go electric versus gas. And how does that maybe coincide with heavily coal dependent states where also you potentially, by switching from gas to electric, could be adding more pollution to the grid?
Good questions. So first off, in order to have, let's say that the grid was 100% coal at night where you are. In order to make less air pollution, you have to have a heat pump that's operating at 300% efficiency. Your house generally would need to be about 300% efficient, which you can do. So that's the first solution, is that if you are more efficient at collecting heat from the air, because that's your source, then all the efficiencies built into the system of delivering you fossil fuel, then yeah, you can leverage the fossil fuels to actually get energy from the air, which is essentially renewable sunshine energy, just stored in water vapor in the air. And that's how you renewably power your home, with thermal renewable energy at 300% efficient or greater on a 100% coal grid. The second issue to be aware of is that gas leaks throughout the system somewhere between 3 and 5% from the well to the tap. Anything over 2% leakage makes the gas worse than coal as a fuel for climate change, just specifically climate change. So right now we are in a disastrous situation where it's, for instance, if we have 4% leakage, what that means is that our gas is essentially twice as dirty as coal. And if you're burning coal in your house versus burning gas, so because gas leaks and is 84 times by the count of molecules, and it's 30 times more powerful of a greenhouse gas pollutant than CO2 by molality, its weight, which is how the IPCC does it by weight. So functionally, natural gas when it leaks is 30 times worse than carbon dioxide, and at a 4% leak, you're getting over the tipping point of it being worse than burning coal in your house. So that is the fact. Right now, it is worse that we burn natural gas in our house than coal, if we were just talking about climate change as opposed to particulates. So you can get over the efficiency hump at 300%. On pricing, there's two strategies for some of the states where the pricing is so extreme. Well, maybe three strategies. One technically is that you get to about a 400% efficiency, and I have a 400% efficient heat pump. There's water heaters and such that are 400%. At that point, you beat it in every state. Every state in the United States is cheaper to run all electric if you're at 400% efficiency. And I wanted to point out that they're at 720% in Japan, lots of products at 600%. So we just have to get to 400% before we win with an all-electric design versus gas in all states. And right now it is worse that we're using natural gas in our homes because of the leaks that are associated with it than if we were just burning coal in our house for climate change. Does that get your question answered?
Yeah, no, I thank you, and I think it might have started answering the next question, which is, you know, a little bit beyond me, so you can maybe elaborate a little bit more. But you know, have you done any analysis of the generation and transmission costs to replace peak thermal demand supplied by natural gas today?
Yeah, there's been a bunch of analysis of that by the California grid operators and the utilities. They want to know, like, you know, what does this mean for us to convert the gas loads of the wintertime into electric loads? And it turns out that because products in California, I mean, and nationally, continue to get more and more efficient. So for instance, lighting right now uses 1/10 the electricity, LEDs, compared to just an incandescent bulb. Radical savings from efficiency there. So they look at the modeled efficiency savings that are required by law in California over the next 15 years, and they overlay that with the additional electricity being used, and they find it's actually a net reduction of electricity. Going forward, the electricity will be starting to peak in the wintertime. That will be new, that they'll have to be thinking about winter peaking, but the total electricity consumption stays flat in California, even with the dramatic increase in loads because we're getting rid of gas. And we've seen that with actually retrofitting apartment complexes, whole communities essentially of like 100 to 300 households, all electric. At the end of the day, they're using significantly less energy than they were at the beginning with gas, with the, you know, the radical efficiency savings and less electricity. It's the crazy thing. Because you go in and you do some other efficiency measures at the same time as you convert the thermal load. So like you put in a low flow shower head and you put in LED lights and you put in Energy Star appliances. And at the end of the day, you've just created so much additional electricity that you can afford to convert things over to gas. And this is happening, I don't know, I think like 30 apartment complexes I'm familiar with that have done this. This is real. It's better all around to be all electric and efficient than what we're doing right now.
And getting into you know, cost, somebody was asking questions on, and I guess this is very subjective again where you are, and so maybe they were specifically speaking to California or the states, you know, makes sense. But they were just saying when you were referencing these, you know, savings, you know, what are the costs of kilowatt hours and CCF, or you know, per therm per kilowatt hour, just I think to give a little bit of perspective.
Well, I'd spent about a year studying all the states in the United States with one of my engineering staff. So I did sort of a massive analysis of all the different rates for each state, the gas versus electricity. And so that I had to answer that question of like, well, in most states you can get there with about 200% of 250% efficient heat pumps, which is the federal minimum. um, as long as they work in the wintertime, that's the main thing. If they have an inverter so they actually keep that efficiency during winter as opposed to converting to electric resistance. So, you're seeing products like Mitsubishi, for instance, here, they're bragging on the fact that they operate like negative 22 degrees Fahrenheit still as a heat pump, and that's what you're looking for. Um, but something that is misleading, I discovered this looking at the utility bills in Washington, D.C. And I had an existing apartment complex that was like 60% efficient gas devices on average. And then I said, okay, well, what if I went in and replaced everything with electricity? The gas stove was 25% efficient. Now it's going to be 90% efficient. So it's kind of like a one-third, two-thirds energy drop, or go through the lighting. I went through all the different items. Said, like, okay, what about is the energy reduction we're going to get with all electric? And I discovered that in most months, the all electric design was kind of break even, maybe it's a little more, a little bit less. But one month was just catastrophic for gas. It was February. Because gas prices in most states, in most situations, are a pass through. So it's an unregulated, in essence, gas pricing. People are familiar with how electricity pricing can go up in the summer because of air conditioning loads. People don't usually study how gas prices go up by 1,000%, tenfold in the course of February. Every single year, we have a humongous price spike right in the middle of our worst heating seasons. It comes with the polar vortexes. We'll get these massive price spikes on gas as the system gets constrained. And that price there is not the quote unquote average gas price. It is the like seasonal gas price. And gas companies for a long time now have been lying to us on purpose, misrepresenting how gas pricing works. You can do this with your own house. Go through your monthly gas bills and understand the interaction between your consumption in February or January and the price of the gas itself. And that will change your understanding of what the quote unquote average price of gas is. You don't get charged the average price of gas during the months that you're using 5 times as much gas, which is the wintertime compared to the summer. So that's a trick. They're trying to trick us all. They've been doing it for a long time. They don't want to tell us about the infrastructure costs, and they don't want to explain the seasonality of gas pricing overwhelming the supposed average gas price. In the real world, it's usually cheaper to go all electric in the wintertime because gas prices get so expensive and electricity prices are relatively stable in the wintertime.
Now, uh, I mean, do you see that changing if we started shifting to to electric and increasing the demand? Would you see that, something like that could shift to where you might see something like that summertime rate increase also happen in the winter?
Well, we see it in Florida now. Florida is a winter peaking state because they use electric resistance so thoroughly. And the orchards of Florida, they'll light those up with Christmas lights during the coldest nights to keep all the trees from freezing. So big electric resistance loads essentially throughout the forests of trees. So yeah, the utilities do respond with price structures to try to incentivize conservation, more or less. Some utilities, they make money the more electricity they sell. About half the states in the United States, there's a split between the incentive to sell more electricity. Uh, but Florida, as an example, they're definitely a for-profit state, so they just make more money. And they go out and develop more resources to make more money. The question, I think, deeper is, can we develop resources that are renewable energy for the wintertime? And the answer is yeah. Offshore wind, onshore wind, but offshore wind is a huge resource that we're starting to develop finally in the United States. California is putting in massive amounts of offshore wind in the next 5 years. Um, so yeah, we have a lot of renewable energy development that we can do to meet peak loads at any time of the year. That's just a bunch of studies have said like, hey, it's going to be hard, but yes, we can do it. And then there's some studies are like, well, that last 10% is going to be really hard to deal with in these peak moments. And yeah, maybe, but right now we're seeing it all over the world that people are getting 100% renewable grids at different times of the day. Like California is getting the whole grid is renewable at times in the spring and the fall. Things are just fine as far as how the grid's working. My prediction is that we're going to do just fine with conservation and wintertime energy development to be able to do this shift, because so far so good. All over Europe, where you're seeing much more wind development and solar development than we have yet in the United States.
Well, yeah, you say conservation, and so my question is, when you're approaching your projects, first of all, what kind of energy modeling softwares or tools do you utilize to kind of really figure out those energy and cost savings between gas and electric? And then what role does thermal envelope improvements play in that?
Well, in California, we use our Energy Pro Title 24 certified software, and the algorithms within it are updated every 3 years or so to stay current with building science. I've contributed to those algorithms with our building science, and I would say they're accurate. They're strongly predictive at a population. I know that a lot of people have experienced that's upsetting with modeling software not matching the actual consumption of a house. I have 500 homes in 9 different apartment complexes under second by second individual load metering. And I can say really clearly that it's like a flock of birds. Like, yeah, there's birds in the middle of the flock and there's birds on the outside of the flock, but it all moves together as a group. I can see that any given day between identical apartments, there's a 1 to 10 ratio between the lowest and the highest consumers in the same apartments with the same household size with the same income. People are very different. So I can say that we use Title 24 software, which predicts the average very well. When I see the huge range that makes the average, I'm always startled, but it's real. There's a 10-to-1 ratio, and over the year, it's a 4-to-1 ratio on average between lowest and highest. So it's still dramatic. It's a classic bell curve, the way it arranges, with a long tail, because people can consume infinite amounts, but they cannot consume less than a certain amount just to keep the house on, a water heater operating, that kind of thing. So Title 24 software is where we go with it. To your question about the shell, California has a mild climate in most of the state, except for the Sierra Nevadas and the Mojave Desert, which are 2 of the most extreme climates that we have in the United States. 10-foot deep snow, 125 degrees during the day. Like Palm Springs is a city built in the Mojave Desert. It is ridiculously hot there. So when we've developed in those places, we have put an extra inch of sheet foam on up in the Sierras. We've put 2 extra inches of sheet foam on in the Mojave Desert and triple pane windows. Elsewhere in California, we've just stuck with 2x6 frame walls that are well inspected to Energy Star standards, and double pane windows down to U value of 0.21, 0.22, somewhere in there, even 2.5 it's perfectly reasonable. And on the coast, it's so mild there, and that's where so many people live. It's actually pretty easy just to do a 2x6 wall, not even inspect it, I'm sad to say, and put in a decent heat pump and call it good. There's just very low thermal loads. People only turn on their heaters and coolers in these apartments 1 out of 3 to 1 out of 7 days in the whole year. They just don't even use them most of the days. At least 2/3 of the day, HVAC does not get used in these apartment complexes that we develop that are reasonably efficient, like Energy Star for Homes efficient. So HVAC is not as big of a deal in most of California as it is in the Mojave and up in the Sierras. And we do a really nice shell up there. And I would recommend in most of the rest of the country, something like a 2x6 wall that's really well inspected. And think carefully about sheet foam, because it holds in moisture and you can rot your walls with that stuff. So I favor going to like better insulation and thicker insulation versus sheet foam. And I know it's a little heretical.
Do you mean
But
rigid foam?
yeah, rigid sheet foam on
Okay.
the outside. I'm a part of some passive house projects where the passive house architect is pointing at the moisture analysis isn't being done in high humidity environments. sufficiently, so people are putting in Tyvek and then they're putting over sheet foam, and those two together, while both are supposed to be vapor permeable, combined are not. And he was just showing deconstruction photos all over the Midwest of homes that are being got like sheets of mold underneath, the white foamy mold underneath the, um, the insulation in Tyvek, because the water isn't leaving the house. So yeah, I think you really have to be careful in high humidity environments about what are the layers of plastic that you put on the outside of a house. It'd be different if people used cork sheets. Really into cork sheet insulation. 1-2 inches thick that's made out of cork. It breathes, and it's also super insulative.
So, I mean, it sounded like you've done, work outside of California or warmer climates. So,
Mm.
I mean, any suggestions kind of when you get into the more climate zone 4 or higher, where we really just have these extremes that can get super hot, super cold, and, sometimes, especially on the super cold side, again, people just have a lot of concerns about the electrification there.
Well, we went through, I think, 2 polar vortex snaps this winter in the Midwest. And Brett, I know you're on the Electrify Everything Facebook site, which I recommend other people come on for technical advice. And I was delighted to see people bragging about their success in having a warm house during the -14 degree Fahrenheit weather outside, because they had a cold climate carrier heat pump, I think I remember specifically. Mitsubishi also. Um, I was a part of a panel in 2015 at the Net Zero Energy Leadership event up in Boston, and my co-presenter was showing their work that was all electric above the Arctic Circle in Canada. This Habitat Studios, and they had a whole bunch of these homes. They did a really wonderful cost-benefit analysis. I can send it on to you. I kept the slides because they're so good. And they were doing like R88 walls up there. So R21 or R30 down in California, R88 up in Alaska, essentially in Canada. That's what it should be at. So there's a range of efficiencies of the walls that people should be climate specific to. And then there's a range of performance of heat pumps out there. And the colder they go, they're incrementally a little bit more expensive, and they're also a little bit less efficient at warmer temperatures. So I have a warmer temperature outside. I got a -5 Fahrenheit heat pump, not the -22. My heat pump installer talked me out of a colder climate one, because he's like, it's not as efficient for the actual temperatures that you have. They've geared it essentially for colder weather than you have, so you should have a warmer one. So I do. But my thinking is a wall that's insulated appropriate to the climate, and a heat pump that gets you between -10 and -20 degrees Fahrenheit pretty much captures all the weather that we get in North America. Maybe electric resistance backup to help you survive if a system broke. I mean, God forbid your heating system broke of any type in the wintertime in the Midwest. And my dad, for instance, in Wisconsin, the propane stopped running into his house. It got so cold, and he had to evacuate over to the school because his fossil fuel didn't serve him in the wintertime because it was too cold. I mean, think about that. If he had an electric resistance heater, he could have hung out in his house. He had a pellet stove, but whatever, he thought that was too expensive.
Sure, sure. Well, this is a multifamily focused session. So, I mean, my understanding of multifamily, no matter where you are, is that you're really dealing with cooling load issues, even in the dead of winter, and not necessarily heating load issues to the same extent, and especially the larger the building gets. So, can you speak a little bit to that in regards to how both heat pump water heaters and heat pump air source heat pumps I guess from what I can tell, are really designed to deal with those large multifamily heating loads or cooling loads.
Yeah. So it's true. I work on some passive house apartment complexes over on the East Coast, and Even with passive house, we do still have a heating load in the wintertime. So when you see a cooling load in places that are kind of surprising, is like cooling loads in the spring and cooling loads in the fall, when people in single family homes that aren't nearly as well insulated are experiencing, the elements outside, and people in these well insulated apartment complexes are keeping themselves warm just with their appliances and their own body heat. We're all essentially a 60-watt electric resistance light bulb in heating output. So in those apartment complexes, like in upstate New York, for instance, they're working specifically with cold climate heat pumps, and they stick them. You can have you need to have a refrigerant if you're going to have it outside, of course, because things freeze. So you use refrigerant-based heat pumps that live outside, deliver hot and cold refrigerant inside to the building, and off you go. Water heaters, though, interestingly, it's actually kind of nice to put them inside of the residences or inside the hallways of apartment complexes, those tanks, and then just share a tank maybe between 2 or 4 apartments, depending upon the size of the apartment. Doing that with an 80-gallon tank is the most efficient because you're operating it inside of an envelope where it's happy to operate. It's not much of a load. It dries out the air, and about half of its energy ends up being free. So it's remarkably efficient when operating inside of a residence or inside of a building. And I recommend those instead of doing a central system for apartments. Apartment complexes, if you do a central system, you have to recirculate hot water, and that doubles the energy load. It also increases the construction cost. So if you use the same heat pump efficiency, but you have it in a tank close to someone's apartment where you can just run plumbing to it without doing a recirc, say like with 1/2 inch or 3/8 inch plumbing so that the hot water gets there very fast, that uses half as much energy and also costs maybe 20% less than doing a central system in the traditional way of having a big thing someplace instead do small ones distributed. It costs less, it's more efficient. So that I have going on in 6 different apartment complexes now, where we're going to those individual tanks located in the hallway and shared among apartments as cheap and efficient.
Do you typically see those shared among like one floor each? I guess it depends on how big the building is, but it's shared with a few units rather than individual units, right?
Right. So it's still a central system, but instead of doing a recirc, it's got direct plumbing from a manifold, and we found that it's a lot less expensive if we share them, like 2 apartments that are 3-bedroom apartments. 2 3-bedroom apartments can share an 80-gallon tank, totally fine. 4 studio apartments for homeless veterans can definitely share an 80-gallon tank, totally fine. We see in a passive house development that Tim McDonald is doing, his Onion Flats developments over in Philadelphia. He does 2 80-gallon tanks together, and then he runs them up in a stack above, to serve 7 apartments above, and he does do a recirc on that. But that's a very cheap system he's found, is to do 2 80-gallon tanks in series to keep 7 apartments going. And he'll have a few of these little stacks down in the basement. Super efficient system, low cost.
And just to confirm, the free heat that the heat pump is taking is really coming from the occupants and potentially some of the sun, hitting the building. That's unavoidable, correct?
Yeah, Ecotope did this analysis. Of the 4 different papers that have come out in the last 2 years, Ecotope did one, and Florida Solar Energy Center did one, and California did one, and forgetting the other one. Anyway, they're all big, significant, published, peer-reviewed studies from good research firms like PP. That's Pacific National Laboratories, P&L. They did the 4th one. Okay, so what they found consistently was that creating a small amount of heat, which means like the compressor on those water heaters runs for an hour a day per house, and like half an hour in the morning, half an hour in the evening, and it's the smallest air conditioner you've ever seen, but smaller. It's a little bit bigger than a refrigerator, and it's smaller than the smallest window air conditioner on the market, which is 5,000 BTUs. These are 4,000 BTUs. They're tiny. So they only operate an hour a day, a little bit at a time. They're just not that much of an impact on the apartments. Um, so sticking them and sharing them between apartments is just the cheapest way to do it.
Um, on single family and maybe small multifamily, obviously the heat pump water heater retrofit concerns come in where you maybe just don't have enough space in the room, right? That's recommended for these heat pump water heaters. So in the Retrofit-Ready program, or in general, just advice, how is that dealt with, so that there's adequate amount of space that's needed for these heat pump water heaters?
Yeah, the space constraints is an issue because heat pump water heaters right now are the smallest of them are 50 gallons, and most people have 40-gallon tanks in apartments or even 30-gallon tanks in apartments. So the space constrained specification part of the retrofit ready overall specification, it basically says these water heaters need to be able to fit where an on-demand gas water heater fits now. That's the smallest we need, and Rheem and HTP have both announced that they have the products and they're going to bring them to market this year. Rheem has said, okay, we did something. I don't know what. They did something to their water heaters and they've sent them home with staff to test out. That happened a couple weeks ago. So we know they're being very serious about bringing out small retrofit ready water heaters that like 300% efficient or better. It's happening. We just have to wait some months, but it's almost here, and then we can take off as an industry in the country of doing large-scale retrofits of apartment complexes of any any configuration of water heater.
Wow. I figured that was coming, but I hadn't heard of it. So going back to your thoughts on electric cars, the question is, if you try to use an electric vehicle to power a home, how do you get to work the next day? If the sun isn't shining due to bad weather for a few days, how do you charge the car? In general, if you get home at 9 o'clock at night, how do you charge your car before going to work in the morning? I know you use power from the grid that comes from fossil fuel.
Yeah. So a car, a car battery starts at about 40 kilowatt hours and goes up to 100 or so kilowatt hours. And apartments, specific to this talk, apartments use somewhere between 13 and 19 kilowatt hours a day. So that's the whole day. If you came home with a car and you wanted to, for some reason, deliver power to your apartment, say between 5 and 9 p.m. during peak usage and when the grid might be constrained, you might use 5 kilowatt hours to power your house at that point in the day. So like taking it off grid essentially and powering it on your car. 5 kilowatt hours, that gets you 20 miles. If your car is rated for, say, like 100 to 280 miles, and you've taken 20 miles off of it by running it that night, you still have plenty of mileage to get to work the next day. Commutes are generally not longer than 30 miles, like a half an hour, maybe it's slow, so it's a whole hour of commuting. So that is if you wanted to be kind of extreme, like and power your house for real every night between 5 and 9. It's still so much energy available in those batteries. Car batteries are huge, and the load that you're offsetting is small. As well, I don't think that people should be powering their cars at home. I think that cars should be powered at work. The sun is out during the day, and there's so much sun available, particularly during the summertime. And businesses have billing mechanisms. Like there's no reason why they can't set up a little like business essentially of selling electricity in the parking lots, which is what we see all over California. Half the electric cars in the United States are sold in California. So we see infrastructure development faster than most of the rest of the country, and I'm seeing that there's a for-profit business in charging cars during the day. And I think that's the right way to do it generally, is that people should come home with a powered up car and they should contribute a little bit of that electricity to the grid or not, and then drive back to their power charger the next day. And that would be better for society, just generally. Now, if you need to power it up at night, um, gas cars use about 3 times as much energy to get you around because they're so inefficient, 2.5 times at least. So you can think of it as like charging it at night, you're using maybe 1/3 as much energy with that electricity to get you around than if you were burning gas. And in that way, it's about the same energy, even if the grid was 100% fossil fuels at night, which it's not, by the way. Grids are never 100% fossil fuel. We produce renewable energy at night all over the country with hydro, as well as geothermal, and some wind. In the Midwest states, from Texas all the way to the Dakotas, 1/3 of the electricity now every day is wind power in those states, because that's the wind alley of our country. All states with Republican administrations, by the way, and they're 1/3 wind now because it's just cheaper. So I think that the worry about a car being a strain on the grid is overblown, not to use a pun there, because there is wind power available at night, and more every day. This spring, for the first time ever, the majority of new power plants being developed in our country were renewable energy. Almost 60% of the applications nationwide for new power plants are renewable energy plants, because they're profitable, because they're cheaper. So, oopsie, pardon me. So that's just sort of my quick answer, is that it's not as bad as people think. We can definitely charge our cars during the day. Like, the grid is not as dirty as we think at night, and it's getting a lot cleaner by the day. And it's definitely not a good thing to charge your car heavily at night in some of the coal-using states of our country. But it's not a bad thing either, and things are changing quickly.
What do you think about the sort of transitional sort of dual fuel products? So, you can have your gas system too, just in case you're nervous or afraid, or you're in really high electric costs, but you still have that sort of heat pump, which you can operate to a certain extent when it gets cold. Do you see that as a good transition, or not worth doing, or maybe depends on where you are?
I think that what is the worth of a livable planet? Like, the United States is the main contributor, other than China, but per capita, for each of us on this call, we are the worst contributors to climate change in the world. And the problem we have is from specifically natural gas leaks, is being maybe 1/4 to 1/2 of the climate change we're going to experience in the next 20 years is just leaked gas. There is no time like the present to get rid of all the gas from your home, to eliminate your contribution to the grid, and to force these utilities to shut down. Because that's the big thing, is like, stopping infrastructure shuts them down. That's the business they're in, not gas development. So if you can get a cold climate heat pump, which you can, then yeah, you should put them into your house, and you should put in enough capacity and spread it around the house. If you have an old, poorly efficient house, like low efficiency, put in high efficiency heat pumps. Just get rid of all the gas as fast as you humanly can, which for most of us is probably like a 3 to 4 year process of going after the appliances, like one at a time, one a year. And you can start with your stove. That's the most dangerous and dirtiest thing in your home. Get one of these countertop 2-burner induction ones and just start using it like I did. I had my gas stove next to it, like I had a hybrid like you're suggesting. I kept that for 6 months, where I used my gas stove every once in a while as I got used to my induction, and I realized I really love my induction more. Similarly, people who get heat pumps discovered that they're quieter than the gas furnaces in the wintertime. They can sleep better. Because they operate most of the time silently, they permeate the house with warmth. You get a warmer house, versus gas furnaces have to turn off because they're so hot at 3,400 degrees Fahrenheit. They would burn themselves up if they stayed on too long. So they turn on and off and on and off, and they have these powerful fans to try to warm the house up quickly while the furnace can operate. You discover that it's actually just better. It's a quieter, cleaner, nicer, warmer house to have heat pumps. And I recommend getting rid of all of the gas and putting in, like, the Mitsubishi Hi2 that you showed, a really cold climate heat pump that can operate in any environment. Just keep it out of the snow. Other than that, you're good to go with any of the crazy weather that we're getting right now. So yeah, that's my pitch. Take it out immediately.
And the last question I got here on the technical side is, could you please explain if heat pumps can cope with higher temperature water radiant systems such as wall-mounted units compared to underfloor water radiant systems that work at lower temperatures?
Yeah, they can. So I've been helping out. I'm going to be in New York City or Brooklyn at the Electrification exposition in a couple of weeks. And to prepare for that, I've been studying how do you do like 180-degree radiator systems that you find in New York City. So the way that you do that, as an example, this is multiple manufacturers can support this. I'm just using an example. Colmac, they're out of Eastern Washington. They have a cold climate heat pump water heater that's for central systems. So you would put in a 5-ton of that, and it can operate down to -4 Fahrenheit. So that's that product. At -4 Fahrenheit, it is now producing water that's 100, 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Not hot enough. You put a water source heat pump on that water, and you essentially concentrate the heat there. You get it up to 180 degrees Fahrenheit. So you're starting with a cold climate heat pump outside that's delivering hot water, or actually delivering refrigerant and hot water inside. I'm trying to think about this one. It lives outside and it must be delivering refrigerant or have a heated element. I haven't seen this installed. I just know that talking with Colmac. Cold climate air source heat pump outside, water source heat pump inside. And you do the whole lift that way with a heat pump, and you keep the coefficient of performance in the range of 200 to 300% in the coldest parts of winter. And you just, so it's two pieces of machinery, one to get the heat from the outside in and one to concentrate the heat in the water up to 180. And that strategy is supported by NIL, and it's supported by Mitsubishi, I believe, with their VRF systems. There's multiple pieces of equipment that can do the first cold lift of hot water, and then another piece of equipment that concentrates the heat for radiators. So yep, totally technically doable. The equipment out there has been done. It's water source heat pumps are not a new thing. People usually did a gas boiler, heated the water up to a certain temperature, and then concentrated it with a water source heat pump. And so really all we're talking about is replacing the first step of the gas boiler and making the whole thing a heat pump. And there's other heat pumps that can do that. For instance, wastewater heat pumps, the Shark and the Piranha, they take the water leaving the building and they have it in a vault. So it's like a 1,500 gallon battery. And they just suck the heat right out of that with the heat exchangers. It's like 1% poop, 99% water in this vault. And they just take the heat out from a water source heat pump. And that water starts so warm that they can get it up to 180 Fahrenheit just with their product. That's another example. I could go on for a little while, but yes, there's multiple strategies to get to 180 degrees Fahrenheit with heat pumps, air source and water source heat pumps, essentially.
And just address some of the concerns with, this idea that you're really, from gas furnaces, you're really getting warmer air, and from heat pumps, there could be some concerns out there. Whether they be real or whether they be outdated or whether they just be uncertain technologies, that maybe you're getting a sort of a less comfortable, cooler air out of like an air source heat pump system.
That just has not been borne out by people's experience. The heat pumps produce, the way they operate is they run for longer and they produce heat continuously, as opposed to furnaces which blast out hot air and then the house gets cold and then hot air then cold. But heat pumps work fine. Putting them into an existing duct system could be a bad idea because the ducts are so inefficient. Ducts frequently leak 50% of their heat. So you might be undersizing for leaky ducts if you just go in there assuming that the ducts are working when they're in fact profoundly broken. So that could be an issue, is undersizing your system because you're using ductwork. I recommend people not use ductwork. It is in the same way I recommend that people not do a central heat pump water heater that does a recirc system because it doubles the energy consumption. It's similarly, if the furnace is losing half of its, or the heat pump is losing half of its energy through the ductwork, or in other words, doubling the energy demand that you need because of the bad recirculation system, then people should move to directly delivering the heat to rooms with a fan coil that's right there, either a ductless on the wall or on the floor or up in the ceiling. or even a small duct system. I was interested to see that you showed low static, medium static, and high static fan coils for Mitsubishi at the beginning of your introduction, Brett. I hadn't seen those medium and high static fan coils that can do blow air harder, essentially. But the point being, if you design your system knowing that you're putting in a heat pump, as opposed to assuming that you have a furnace when it's not, this is a different thing. But if you design it for a heat pump, then it works terrifically. And if you if you make the mistake, for instance, of taking out a gas boiler and just sticking in a heat pump that has the same amount of BTUs per hour, you'll destroy the heat pump, because those heat pump water heaters are designed to run continuously at a lower temperature, essentially, and with a higher delta T. So the water that comes back is supposed to be cold to a heat pump. And if you deliver it hot, because the existing recirculation system delivers hot water to the boiler, a boiler doesn't care that the water is hot. A heat pump cares that the water is hot. So that's an example of, you can design just fine for the heat pump as long as you don't just pretend that it's a gas furnace or a gas boiler and not implement the best practices for heat pumps. Once you are installing heat pumps, then everything's awesome if you just install them the way they're supposed to be installed.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, Sean, I really appreciate your time. I thank everyone else for joining us here today as well. And just real quick, Sean, where can people contact you or learn more information if they'd like to?
Well, we have a website, redwoodenergy.net, and you can find publications there. You can see lots of case studies and examples and things like that. Up on the screen here, of course, is my email address, my phone number, my office phone number. I'll be on vacation for the next 2 weeks. I'm actually literally getting into a car as soon as this is over. So I'll be kind of delayed in my response, but I'd be happy to support you. I think that, Brett, you have here this handout intro to all electric and multifamily that we developed. And I encourage people, if they've got questions, to start by reading that. We spent a half a year and my entire professional career developing that booklet to try to explain best practices. So, a whole range of products. There's 20 pages of products. There's pages of discussion of best practices for central heat pump water heaters and installation. And it really digs into all of your next step questions. And so I encourage you to read it and then ask me a question, because I've tried to answer most of those simpler questions by writing a little booklet. It's for free. It's not a for-profit effort. Just read it and it's for you, kind of thing. But yeah, give me a ring. I'll happily help you out.
All right. Well, Sean, I appreciate your time, and sorry for holding you up. Have a great vacation, and have a great rest of the week, everybody. Take care.